Dave Atwell lived the life. Bikes and dirty dealings, from violence to drug trafficking as a sergeant at arms for the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, until he had had enough. Now, in witness protection, he teamed up with journalist Jerry Langton to tell his story. It's called The Hard Way Out: My Life with the Hells Angels and Why I Turned Against Them. And it brings Jerry Langton to our studio tonight. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We should probably point out that you are not Dave. You're not the biker. You are the journalist.
Yes.
So how did you meet Dave Atwell?
Well, I've written a lot of books about organized crime, particularly motorcycle gangs, and I'm pretty open on social media. And people come up to me all the time asking me to tell their story. And most of the time, their stories are not really, sort of what you would write a book about. But Dave's was different because a lot of factors. He left the Hells Angels voluntarily. He did so without facing, major prison time. And it was really a heartfelt story of someone who was very thoughtful and contemplative, and I thought it really deserved a book.
So you have a bunch of people contacting you, even like criminals on
Had a
social
couple
media?
today, actually, because of TV.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so something about Dave's story compelled you to agree to write this book with him.
Absolutely. It was different.
And any particular reason why, beyond the fact that he left the Hells Angels voluntarily?
Well, yeah, it was the circumstances under which he left. Normally, when people agree to be an undercover agent, which in and of itself is sort of an exciting premise, it's because they're facing a long prison term, or they have a drug addiction, or somehow their life has gotten out of control. But with Dave, it was different. He got arrested, he went to jail, but the charges against him were stayed. But he saw the life that he had. He didn't want to continue being a drug dealer. He didn't want to continue in that world, and just thought, this is my way out.
As a journalist covering organized crime, how difficult is it to get those that you're interviewing involved?
It can be very difficult. A lot of people involved with organized crime, even as distant associates, have a great deal of fear of reprisal if they say the wrong thing, if they mention the wrong name. So a lot of times, what I learned has to be corroborated through law enforcement, through lawyers, through informants. So it can be quite difficult.
Do you ever wonder, what is it about that genre that attracts you? Because you're dealing with criminals.
I think it's because it's out of the ordinary, and a lot of it is underreported. It's the truth. A lot of people don't like to believe that that exists. But when we see, when we saw the Organized Crime Commission in Montreal about 5 years ago, we saw that every part of the public construction industry had been infiltrated by organized crime. People were making money all over the place. Standards weren't up to what they should have been. That puts the public not only in a position where they're losing their tax dollars, but they're also in danger if their infrastructure isn't working properly. And we see that in places in Ontario, all over Ontario, where we see drug trafficking, where we see other sorts of chronic crimes being committed, and very little done about it until someone like Dave Atwell comes forward.
No, his story is so interesting to me. He grew up in, I guess, it sounded kind of idyllic, middle-class family in Scarborough. Why would somebody like that choose this path?
Well, David in particular, he really fell into the path a lot of the way many people do. The motorcycle clubs, a lot of people think that they're taken from, sort of the dregs of society. And it isn't really that way. You have to think of them almost as businesses. They want people who are valuable to the club. And when Dave was in his late teens and early 20s, he was very successful in the security industry, particularly as a personal bodyguard for VIPs. And that gave him a lot of skills. He knew how to check a room for bugs. He knew how to lose a tail if he was driving. He knew how to spot dangers within a crowd. And for an organization like the Hells Angels, that's invaluable.
But for him, he led a seemingly double life. In the daytime, he guarded corporate people, some very important people in Canada. And then on his off time or nighttime, he was, he guarded clubs, and then he became a biker.
Right.
Why did he do, what do you think these two different worlds gave him?
Well, excitement. He grew up sort of in, my generation from a city very similar to the one I did. And, there's a lot of drinking, a lot of partying. And when you're riding a motorcycle, particularly Harley, you want to be with like-minded people. And the first club that he was with were the Paradise Riders. And, some of them committed crime, but they really were a motorcycle club. They were guys who liked to ride the motorcycles together, take trips together, party, have a great time.
And how did he join them?
He like people join them. You don't go to a motorcycle gang and apply.
Yeah.
They always find you. You have to be sort of the person they want to recruit.
And they liked him because he got into a lot of fights.
He was a big guy. He knew how to handle himself. He was doormat at some of Toronto's most notorious clubs of the era. He was the kind of guy who, if you challenged him to a fight, he would knock you out. And again, that's very desirable to the clubs too. And it wasn't really until the Paradise Riders became the Hells Angels that things sort of fell apart for him, that he became sort of involved in the criminal world.
We're going to talk more about the transition, but how do the members of a motorcycle club think of themselves? Is it just like a group of guys who like motorcycles?
Well, it depends on the club. It's very hard to sort of generalize. I mean, there are people in the Hells Angels who have never committed a crime in their life, but by and large, the Hells Angels can be considered a gang because they have a disproportionate number of people who commit crimes, and the same sorts of crimes over and over again, trafficking, extortion, that sort of thing. The people in the clubs themselves often see themselves as very different from outside society, mainstream society. They call people within mainstream society citizens, and it's not a compliment, A lot of the way they think and behave is very throwback, very atavistic, where, strong men are in charge and rules are enforced by fear, fear of punishment. Everything is about
What do you mean
respect.
fear of punishment? Like from one of the other members? Or?
From one of the other members, or from one of the members to the public. Like,
not so much from like the police or anything.
No, the police aren't really a big part of the world until operations happen. But for example, the colors they wear, the vest with the patch on it. If you or I were to touch that, we would expect, to be assaulted.
Just touching someone's clothes.
Exactly. Yeah, because that would be a sign of disrespect in their world.
Well, the Paradise Riders were eventually patched over to the Hells Angels. What does that mean?
What that means is they became Hells Angels. Normally, it's extremely difficult to become a Hells Angel.
Because that's like the top of the food chain.
They're like the New York Yankees of motorcycle gangs. And but in the late 1990s, around 2000, the Canadian Hells Angels wanted basically
More members?
More members, and to be the dominant crime organization from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And their recruitment came out of Montreal. It was their national president, Walter Stadnick, who was an Ontario native from Hamilton, Ontario. In an unprecedented move, he offered the existing motorcycle gangs in Ontario to become Hells Angels without having to earn it. It's just simply, we'll make you Hells Angels. And one of the clubs he wanted, the primary club he wanted, were the Paradise Riders, because they were well organized.
Did everybody say, yes, we want to become Hells Angels, or did some say no?
No.
Okay.
Some said no, some were refused. The club that later became the Banditos with the Shed Massacre, they were told, no thank you. And some said no, like the Vagabonds, who keep going as an independent club. Some of the loners, and even some of the Paradise Riders said no and wanted to continue as Paradise Riders, but they couldn't. There weren't enough of them. And
so they go to Quebec for this big, what would you call it? Like
ceremony.
A ceremony. And at one point, Dave reflects that, the one thing that he knows about the Hells Angels is you might find yourself in a situation where you might have to kill somebody.
Yeah. In the 90s, up until the early 2000s, there was something known as the Quebec Biker War, in which the Hells Angels fought, amongst others, the Rock Machine and a group called the Dark Circle, and to a lesser extent, the Outlaws. And I think close to 180 people died. And it didn't really make that big of a media impact outside of Quebec, because it was basically just drug dealers killing other drug dealers. It wasn't until an innocent 11-year-old boy was killed accidentally that really it made an impact. But even though it wasn't well known in the rest of Canada amongst the citizens, all of the bikers knew about it. And so a lot of people knew that the Quebec Hells Angels, those that rose to the top management-wise, were people who had high body counts, or reputed at least to have high body counts. And so when guys in Ontario were looking at the prospect of being Hells Angels, the first thing that crossed their mind was, oh my God, do I have to kill someone to do so?
But they still became members.
They did. They were assured they didn't have to kill anyone, that everything would be peaceful here in Ontario. And for the most part, it was.
I'd like to read a passage from the book.
Sure.
You write, there are bikers and then there are Hells Angels. Everybody, including cops, other bikers, women, everybody, looks at you differently when you're wearing the Death's Head patch. You get a lot of respect, and it's a different life. It's more than being part of a club. It's a job, it's a career, it's a lifestyle. To put on the Hells Angels patch is to get something very rare and very valuable, something a precious few have ever experienced, but something that also comes at a great cost. So what was the cost?
Well, there are stages to becoming a Hells Angel, as there are with any of the one-percenter gangs. At first, you're what's known as a hang-around, which means you're someone who's sort of a friend of the club. They're feeling you out to see if you are someone who they like, someone who they can trust. And if you're successful at that, you become a prospect. Life changes when you're a prospect.
Because you're closer to the top.
Indeed. You get more responsibilities, but you also
Have to take orders.
have to take orders, and it can be grueling. A lot of people don't make it through. You have to do anything the full patch members say, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how humiliating. And because you're on call 24/7, it's almost impossible to have a job outside. Some people can manage it, especially if they have worthwhile talents like Dave did. But many people who go through the prospecting stage find that the only way they can support themselves is by selling illegal drugs. And so trafficking becomes rampant at that stage.
The passage I just read, it mentioned respect, but I'm curious, is it really respect or is it fear?
Well, yeah, it depends. It depends on one's definition of respect. And when I say that a lot of these guys have very throwback attitudes towards that sort of thing, respect gained through fear is to them respect. You know.
Well, in the book, there's another sentence I just wanted to read. Dave says, my patch was like an entry pass for anything I wanted, a credit card I never had to pay off. To me, kind of sounds like entitlement.
Indeed. You know, if you have the patch on, or if someone knows you're a Hells Angel, because they generally only wear the patch at ceremonial occasions, and you walk into the right sort of bar and it's crowded, it'll open up. A seat will be made for you in the best place. A drink will be put down before you're seated, and you don't have to pay. And that's just the way it is. And Dave really liked that, as a lot of people would. I mean, there's a passage in the book where he was part of a junior high school hockey team, and they all had jackets that showed who they were, and they were treated differently. Even at that young age, everybody was sort of in awe of them, and that feeling never went away from him.
So I guess that's why he was looking for just something like clothing, right?
Absolutely. You know, a symbol, you know, some sort of badge that could say, I'm someone.
How serious a problem are the Hells Angels in Canada?
I always say that, you know, so they're sort of the dominant crime organization in Canada. You know, we've seen the traditional Italian and Irish mafias are shrinking in their ability to get things done. Street gangs are rising, but because of their sort of disorganization and lack of discipline, really don't make that much of an impact. A law enforcement officer once told me that if you're involved in any sort of vice in Canada, you know, be it stolen materials or illegal drugs, steroids, whatever, it's probably been through a biker's hands at one point or another.
Wow. You mentioned the mafia, but you don't see too many people in the mafia advertising themselves as members of the mob. But with Hells Angels, they sell merchandise for fans. Why do they want people to know that they're Hells Angels or supporters of Hells Angels?
There is branding. You know, it's not illegal to be a Hells Angel. And as I pointed out earlier, just because you're a Hells Angel doesn't mean you're a criminal, right? Even though they have been called a criminal organization in Ontario.
So what's the difference?
The difference is if you're in court convicted of being a member of a criminal organization, you face longer sentences, right? And that's it. You know, not every Hells Angel is a criminal. but they are considered a criminal organization for legal terms.
But if there wasn't the arrest, they probably wouldn't get the police attention to begin with, right?
Absolutely. Being a Hells Angel means you are under a great deal of surveillance all of the time. You know, in Ontario particularly, most of the cops know your name, you know, where you live, and if you ride your motorcycle a couple of miles, you're probably going to be stopped 3 or 4 times for your license and insurance.
And also the Hells Angels merchandise is a way to make money.
Absolutely. It's a great way to make money, and they actually made a great deal of money selling at a store in New Brunswick because they were also sending by FedEx cocaine and selling through their store. But the Hells Angels don't let anyone other than a full patch member wear their logo. Other gangs will, but the Hells Angels will sell what they call support gear. You could wear something that says red and white, which are their colors, or the Big Red Machine, which is their nickname, or Support 81. And 81 is their nickname because 8 is the 8.
Is the
H
H,
is the eighth. And
the 1 is the A.
Yeah, so they like to keep their image going because it helps. It helps in the criminal world because they can recruit people, they can intimidate people, and it also helps in the outside world. I mean, people don't realize this, but when the Hells Angels came to Alberta, and I think it was 2001, they were greeted at the border by cheering crowds who wanted their autographs, wanted pictures of them with their babies. You know, a lot of people think the Hells Angels are really cool. They're great rebels. You know, they don't stand up for the sort of indignities that we all have to put up with in society. So it's kind of a dichotomy there. You know, they're kind of cool, but we also know they have a side that can be a little bit dangerous.
Now, Dave eventually becomes, he starts to deal drugs as a member of the Hells Angels.
Yeah.
In the book, though, there was always a line where he was doing it on his own, but not part of the Hells Angels.
Yeah, I mean, drugs are always around when you're in sort of that world. And he never really thought of selling drugs until he lost his job in security. And you have to remember, he had a fairly high paying, interesting job as
that he liked,
that he loved, and so when he lost that because he was a Hells Angel. As a matter of fact, the company he worked for, when he told them he was a Paradise Rider, they said that shouldn't be a problem. If you get arrested, then we'll deal with it then. But as soon as he patched over to Hells Angels, both the RCMP and the OPP
did a background check.
And he lost his job in security. He lost his private investigator's license. He couldn't support himself anymore.
Did you ever ask him if they gave him the option, like if you stop being a Hells Angels, you can keep your job?
No, yeah, I mean, I did ask, but it doesn't work that way.
Would you think he probably would have stayed with the Hells Angels anyways?
I'm not sure if it was the club or the career, because he really did love his career. And, you know, once he became a Hells Angel, things changed. You know, it wasn't the Paradise Riders anymore. But being a Hells Angel is kind of like, you know, being an ex-Hells Angel in security is kind of like being an ex-cop and trying to be a Hells Angel. It's not going to happen.
So he started to deal drugs to survive, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, another member gave him some cocaine and said, you know, sell that and, you know, you'll be fine for a little while. And then it became his way of life because he had no other way of making money and because the profits are huge and it's relatively easy. I mean, you walk a kilogram of cocaine, which is about this big, a couple of blocks, and you make a few $1,000s, and you know, you keep repeating that, and it's a lot of money.
But eventually he's arrested, and he's put in jail. I want to read you what he had to say about his fellow bikers. I looked at these guys whom I had always admired, had wanted to be like, and for the first time saw them the way almost everybody else did. I saw them for what they really were. All I could see was a bunch of lowlifes, really insecure drains on society. I couldn't think of it any other way. I was locked in a room full of bums. And what made it worse was that they were my sworn brothers in arms. I was one of them. What was he arrested for?
Trafficking and conspiracy to traffic. Often when you're in a situation where you're in a group in which you're considered a criminal organization, and this is, you know, what they say, that police will put a lot of charges, or the Crown will put a lot of charges on you, hoping that can intimidate you into looking for a deal. And so he got a lot of small charges, but realistically he was just facing for trafficking and conspiracy to traffic. But They didn't catch him with a big score. I think they caught him with, 98 oxycodone tablets and a little bit of marijuana. And
He couldn't figure out what happened to the other two, right?
yeah,
'Cause he was a
exactly,
hundred
yeah.
that was.
And they didn't catch him with any cocaine. And so he then became a small fish. Despite his high rank in the club, he was a small fish as a trafficker because other guys had like bricks and bricks and bricks of cocaine. So the charges against him were stayed because it, as often happens in Canada, if it proves to be too expensive or too time-consuming to mount a case against someone, the government will either give up on it or put it off.
So eventually, though, he becomes an informant for the OPP.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, when you're in that situation, when you're a biker, particularly after an arrest, law enforcement will approach you frequently and try to make you deals. And he was originally approached by some bikers pretending to be law enforcement and to see if he was the type to turn. But he saw through that. I mean,
He reads body language for a living. Well, he used to. Yeah.
And then the RCMP approached him, and they seemed very unsophisticated to him. That their form of security did not give him a feeling of personal security. And then when he was approached by the OPP...
And they weren't going to pay him anything, right?
They weren't going to pay him, no. The OPP were going to pay him, and they had a system that made him feel much more secure. So he took their offer.
What kind of deal did they offer him?
He actually ended with, I think it was $450,000 for 15 months of work.
Wow.
Yeah. And witness protection.
I find it interesting that he actually became an informant for the OPP because he was very much about the brotherhood, about his friends, and not lying. And then he started to just lie to everybody.
Yeah, that's sort of the moral dilemma of the book, because he kind of felt lied to as well, because he was promised a lifestyle and it did not turn out the way that it was advertised. And like that passage says, he kind of saw the bright light on the people he was with and in the world he was in, and it changed his perspective a great deal.
When he was doing this, did anyone in the club suspect him?
Yes, and near the end. That's why his tenure as an undercover agent lasted 15 months. The operation was supposed to last 18 months, but his own assessment of the situation and the OPP, what they heard going on is they realized his life was in danger, so they cut it short and they realized they had enough evidence.
And how many people ended up in prison because of Dave?
I can't remember. I think it was 31? Yeah.
Well, it was towards the end of the book, there's this great line, and Dave says, I had always taken pride in being the guy people noticed, and now I had to be exactly the opposite. Like once he started living undercover, did you get a sense of regret from him for turning it at all?
I'm not sure regret is exactly the right word.
Because he couldn't even talk to his dad, or
or any of his family or old friends. He has no pictures from his old life. He has had to recreate memories. He's had to create an entirely new life, an entirely new narrative. When he meets a new person, he has to lie to them a lot. And that sort of no-win situation is why the book's called The Hard Way Out, because I've spoken to a lot of people in the world, and they said, oh, he took the easy way out, he went informant. And it's not the easy way out at all. I mean, he spent 15 months fearing for his life as an undercover informant. And yes, he made some money from it, but he spent years hiding from everyone, and then he's had to recreate himself as another person, isolated from everyone he's ever known. It's not an easy life at all.
Is he at risk? Have you been in touch with him?
Oh, I'm in touch with him all the time, and obviously there's some risk, but witness protection's done a great job. He's done a great job on his own, being this new person.
But yet the Hells Angels are still around. Does he think it was worth it?
I think. And I don't want to speak for him here, but I think that he thinks he made the best of a bad situation.
Was he seeking retribution, do you think?
Against them? Perhaps, but there's no feeling of animosity against the individual members. He recognizes, sort of the poor choices they've made and the road they've gone on and how perhaps they've helped him. But there was nobody in the club that he hated. There was no one in the club that he wanted to see punished. He really wanted to see, and the result is most of the people who were convicted They serve their time, and now they're out of the club, and they have different jobs. And, he can take solace in the fact that, he's put them on or helped put them on lifestyles that are better, perhaps, than the ones they had with the Hells Angels.
But I'm guessing other members of Hells Angels might not appreciate being in the media so much.
No, I mean, nobody wants to go to jail. Nobody wants to go to prison. And certainly no one wants to fight for their freedom. And a lot of the guys who were Hells Angels enjoyed that life. I mean, it can be very rewarding if that's the sort of reward you're looking for.
I want to switch gears for a minute. We have just a little bit of time left, and ask you, as someone who covers organized crime for a living, what effect the legalization of weed might have on the Hells Angels and other criminal organizations?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, actually, and especially years ago when it was more, sort of a question, was weed going to be legalized or not? And it'll have very little effect, especially in big cities, because weed is not really something the Hells Angels or major crime organizations want to deal in. The profits are very, very low. It's big, it's bulky, it's easy to detect. Dogs can smell it a mile away. And generally, and weed heads are very hard to satisfy. Generally don't have a lot of money either, according to my sources. And generally, weed dealing, especially in big cities, is done at a level below the interest of the Hells Angels or the Mafia or someone big and organized like that.
Is there something else that you want to cover in crime that you haven't done so?
No, I think part of what I like to cover is, as I said previously, I like to let people know that it is out there, that, you shouldn't be mawkish or naive and think, oh, it doesn't happen here, it doesn't happen in my town, and then see the headlines when it does happen in your town.
Thank you so much for being here, Jerry.
Thank you.
Great read.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.